Welcome to another episode of National Divorce Talk Raw with your host, Marc Ruiz Evans, where we cover the information anywhere in America, anywhere around the world, and especially here in California on the topic of peaceful national divorce, providing information to you that the mainstream media simply will not cover based upon our over 10 years of experience as activists and data aggregators. Today, we're going to look at this article right here. It came out in a small publication. Let me find that real quick. Okay. I'm going to cover the article that we're going to cover right now, and then I'll explain why it's important. So, the relationship between California and China is the largest diplomatic experiment between superpowers by Analia Lorente, BBC News World, Los Angeles, February 9, 2022. Here's what the article says. For a long time, California functioned quite independently from Washington, D.C. and the rest of the U.S. government. Between 2008 and 2018, a full 10 years, there was no U.S. national policy on how to treat Chinese students at U.S. universities. There was no national policy, or there was a very late one around Chinese investment. Starting in 2018, Washington began to regain its power in the negotiation of local governments, companies, and universities with China. California mayors can no longer invite Chinese investors to build factories in their communities or simply have Chinese investors buy California startups. So what they're talking about is that it's the year 2022, and the ability for California to negotiate directly with China for university students, for investment, and for many other things has been greatly curtailed under the Biden administration. What they're also saying is that since 2018, this has been going on. So that actually means that under Trump and continued under Biden, because this article is saying this started in 2018, but the article came out in 2022. The election was in 2020. So for the last 2 years of Trump's administration and the first 2 years of the Biden administration, same thing. Washington is pulling control from California about Chinese students and Chinese investments. The result has been a lack of money to the California economy because it cannot negotiate freely. Let me show you that article real quick. Relationship between California and China is the largest diplomatic experiment between superpowers. By the way, this was printed in the BBC. No American news publication would cover this, although the researcher is an American. So he's from a Trans-Pacific Experiment, How China and California Collaborate and Compete for a Future, I believe by the Carnegie Endowment. So here's this article. Here's an American talking about the effect on California and China and how the U.S. federal government is hurting California's economy by not letting California negotiate freely as it was able to do for 10 years. And then it's done the exact same thing under the Trump and Biden administration, exactly the same, hurting the California economy. And yet no American newspaper and no American could cover this American-based publication by an American affecting an American state. That should tell you something. Here's a bunch of Americans doing research showing this American state's hurt, and no one in America can cover it, but a world news organization says, wow, that's actually newsworthy. But you won't see any of it in American news. And what it's basically saying is that California had freedom to negotiate with China, not on weapons or secrets, but the economy and students. And that's been taken away by both the Trump and Biden administration, and that has greatly hurt California. Here's another article. So while the Biden administration is backing up the Trump administration on its treatment of limiting China's ability to interact with Californians and curtailing the freedom we've known for 10 years, by the way, Chinese investment in California is what got California out of the recession. So let's be clear about that. The amount of investment in California is what propelled California out of the recession. If you go back to the 2008 to 2014 recession, California was the first and most hard-hit state in all of America for the recession. So worst recession we've seen in a century, 2008. California is the worst hit place in all of America. How did we get out of it? By federal help? No, there was no federal bailout. We've covered that. Governor Schwarzenegger asked President Obama for a bailout, and he was told, tough, you get nothing, even though you're a federal donor state, and you've done that for years. In return, California reached out to China, and because of Chinese investment, we were able to pull ourselves out of the recession. So the recession starts in New York, not California. We are punished by that recession, the worst anywhere in America. We go to the federal government and say, hey, we've been a federal donor for 30 years. Can you give us a little bit of money? And Barack Obama, beloved by Californians, says, hell no, you're on your own. We're not doing nothing for you. By the way, Governor who became President Clinton during the 2001 recession, California also asked for help from that also Democrat at the federal government and was also told, tough, you get nothing. So how did California get out of the recession? Chinese investment. And now the thing that pulled us out of the worst recession in a century, we are now blocked from being able to do. So while the government of Biden is backing up the Trump policy of blocking California from getting money into our economy and hurting us so bad, the Biden administration is also basically not following through with a trade strategy, and that's generally hurting California. So Biden says, no, you can't have trade with China, just like Trump did. But he's also not saying, hey, I'll work with you to buttress trade with other nations. California is being held back because the federal government under Biden, which is supposed to be the responsible one, doesn't have a trade strategy. And that's literally hurting California's economy. At the same time, the Biden administration does have a strategy to China, which is to reduce the amount of investment we can get, which also hurts their economy. So we can't do business with China, which hurts our economy. And they're not really willing to work hard to make sure there's other trade deals with the rest of the world, which California needs, and that's also hurting our economy. But here's the big point I want to point out to you. This is old news. Here's the book, Global California, Rising to the Cosmopolitan Challenge by Abraham Lowenthal, published in 2009. And what it says is California is an international trade state. The rest of America isn't. We're seen as weirdos by the federal government, and because of that, we do not have trade deals approved. Remember this? Trump's trade war with China is going to hurt California. Well, Biden's doing the same thing now. And you know, it just continues there. So let's cover some of the quotes. Here's the article in 2022. California was able to function independently with China, had a lot of good times. Now that's over, and it's hurting the California economy. Can't make negotiations anymore. Starting with Trump, continuing with Biden. Now, here's the book I just showed you in 2009, or over a decade earlier, saying the exact same thing. Although Californians have important international policy interests, we do not have systematic ways to identify, rank, and pursue them. Page 81. Californians have important international interests, but cannot pursue most of them effectively through state public policies. Page 125. Page 12. The absence of significant California-focused considerations of international issues owes to the traditional tendency to think of foreign policy as exclusively managed by Washington. So 2009, they're documenting this is the problem. Now we see it popping up again in 2022. Lack of a trade strategy by Biden hurting us. Block from doing trade with China hurting us. And a few more examples. 10 years ago, here's Schwarzenegger complaining that Obama and the federal government doesn't do enough to improve international trade. So the problem was documented in 2009. Hey, we're an international trade economy and you're stalling us. Then a few years later, the governor is complaining to Obama and the federal government, you're stalling us on an international trade. Then 10 years later, now they're talking about how we're being stalled on international trade and trade with China. So this is a 20-year problem where California needs international trade and is blocked or stalled by the federal government. It has gone through Obama, Trump, and Biden, and was there during the time of George W. Bush. That's what Lowenthal's book was based upon, primarily coming out in 2009, which ended the two-term presidency of Bush. So Bush W, blocked trade. Obama, blocked trade. Trump, blocked trade. Biden, blocked trade. 20-year problem. Just showed you multiple examples. It's not getting any better, and it's bad for our economy. Let's show you a couple other examples of how the federal government is not good for California and why we need to secede. Here you go. All mainstream sources. So here's another one that came out just recently. States take on COVID sick leave with federal help nowhere in sight. Remember when they said that the situation with COVID was so horrible because Trump sucked as president and he couldn't manage anything? Well, here's Biden a year and a half later, and he can't manage to get federal help to California. So you had Trump, who did COVID horribly, right? That was the thing. Trump sucks. He doesn't know how to govern. That's why California is doing so difficulty with COVID. It's Biden. It's a year and a half later. Federal government is still not helping with COVID. There's the quote. But the bipartisan anxiety that pushed Congress to pass a temporary paid sick leave mandate just 2 years ago is long gone. That was during the Trump thing. Federal inaction is pushing the fight to blue states like California and Illinois, who are debating paid sick leave. So why is it that if Biden's so different than Trump, he's just as ineffective at helping the states with COVID as Trump was? It's almost like the federal government can't help the states with COVID, and it wasn't really Trump, it was the federal government, and that's why we're seeing failure at the federal level to help us with COVID, even though it's supposed to be a totally new president. This just came out very recently. Politico is a mainstream source. Let's take another look. Here's another policy by Trump continued under Biden. Biden reversed the Trump Muslim ban. Advocates say little has changed. February 5th, 2022, that's very recently. But advocates, initially grateful and optimistic, now say little has changed, and most applicants have yet to be reunited with their families or even notified of their status. So people said, Trump, horrible for banning people from Muslim countries. Biden said, we're not doing that. It's a new day in America. But actually, nothing's really changed. So the policy by Trump has been continued by Biden. And I know you've already seen this, but I would just want to repeat it. Here's the Democrats. So we get that. I know paywalls. They don't make it easy, do they? So that's the Democrats talking about how at the Washington Post, 2021, March 16th, 2021, here's the Washington Post saying the Democrats are doing exactly the same thing as Trump on the border, and they're not complaining. So when Trump did it, it was racist and bad. But the Democrats have been in charge for a year. They're doing the exact same thing, and they don't really have a big problem with it. If you're worried that that's a fluke, that's the Washington Post saying that. Here's the New York Times saying the exact same thing. So here's the point. Trump, racist as horrible, anti-American for the way he treats Latino kids on the border. Biden does the exact same thing. Trump, racist and anti-American for how he treats Muslims. Biden, the exact same thing. Trump, horrible because he's inefficient and doesn't know how to run government, and that's why he wasn't able to provide the leadership during COVID. Biden, the exact same thing. Trump, trade war with China, hurting us. Biden, the exact same thing. And this has gone on since 2009. So when we look at trade, immigration, the border, and COVID, there is not much difference between the Biden and Trump administration. This is what we've always been telling you at CalExit. The federal government is a failure, can't help us, and is holding us back. This has been well documented. Many of these articles I'm bringing up are 8 months old or a decade old. Why am I informing you of this stuff? Why isn't this all over the news? The federal government is a failure for California. We literally just showed you the references, and that's why we'll always push for a CalExit. Let's take a look at the comments. If the comments are relevant, we will cover them. If they are not, we will not. Yep, Biden is a different shade of Trump. And that catch line of Biden is a different shade of Trump was invented by Jason Wright. Jason Wright exclusively invented that line. Biden is a different shade of Trump. We already have our own land, our own people, our own culture and economic systems. All we need to hold is a CA ref. Absolutely agree. Well, thank you very much. This is a short piece, but just wanted to keep you up on the information coming out about how the Biden administration and the Trump administration are basically the same on at least 4 different policy areas that directly affect California in a negative way. So even though Biden won, the push for secession is still there and is still as great. Thank you, and we'll see you next time on National Divorce Talk Raw with Marc Ruiz Evans.